for the day at the Future of Blockchain Summit at the Exchange stage. This talk is Decentralized Wireless Solutions Expanding Global Mobile Network Coverages with our speaker, Samir Bishay. Please come to the stage. Give it up.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Real pleasure to be here today. So, super excited to talk to you about KarrierOn. We are a decentralized wireless network deployment using blockchain technologies. I'm super passionate about this project, and I'm not sure if a lot of you know this already, but 1/3 of the world's population is off the grid. They are not connected on the internet. That's almost 3 billion people. Now, when you put that in perspective and you look at the United Nations calling the internet a fundamental human right, that's pretty scary. That 1/3 of the world's population does not have access to a fundamental human right. And I was telling you earlier, I'm super passionate about it because I've been building networks for almost 25 years in Africa, in Europe, in Middle East, in North America. Now, in case you're wondering how old I am, I started at the age of 10, that's why. Oh. So one of the challenges in decentralized wireless networks is the authentication, the security, the billing that happens. And this is what poses a challenge to make sure, I mean, if it was that easy, the operators would have done it already. But it is easy, but it doesn't make sense from a fiscal perspective for a traditional operator to build a network in a centralized manner. Now imagine a world that every user is able to, that you're able to harness the power of the creative mind across all political boundaries, geographical boundaries. The ability to harness and deploy that human skill set, irrelevant of any location you might be in. This is the power of connecting people globally, internationally, and this is the mission that we're on to be able to deploy and run these networks. If you look at the problem here, they could be summarized in 4 different pillars. One is traditional users. That's basically you, me, you know. If you go to Toronto, for example, that's my backyard. You drive an hour north of Toronto, you don't have connectivity. You lose cellular coverage. You try to dial 911, from a public safety perspective, you're basically out of luck on that one. So what do? Well, there's not much you could do. You could just call the mobile operator and ask, hey, this is my address, and when are you planning on scheduling some time to deploy my antenna for the community? And they basically look you up and they say, oh, you're 5 years out, and there's nothing you could do about that. Another pillar are basically a non-dominant telcos. So non-dominant telcos are traditionally telcos with like 15, maybe maximum 20% market share. And what the problem that they run into is that they don't have enough customers fast enough to be able to spend the capex to roll out that network. So it ends up being a catch-22 for them. They need to deploy the infrastructure fast enough, not in a centralized manner. So how do they do it? They need a community to do it for them. Enterprise users. So if you think of oil, gas, mining, there's a lot in the region here, for example. There's a lot in Arctic Canada where you have like a lot of mining operations. Same problem. What do? They have to beg an operator to do it for them, and an incumbent operator, that is. And basically the operator say, sure, we'll do it for you, but it's going to cost you $250,000 to just put one little antenna. Same thing. Now they're back to square one, or they have to fork up the money. And finally, the established telcos are actually looking for these solutions, but they just don't know it yet because they're typically the more arrogant of the bunch. They say we could do it ourselves. The challenge is, if you've ever been at airports in North America, if you've ever been in parking garages and even downtown Los Angeles, I was talking to some of my friends there. If something happens from a, God forbid, a heart attack, you can't even dial 911 because there's no coverage. And you are in downtown LA in a parking garage, unable to get service. So now, what do you do as well? There's not much you could do up until this point. Some of the, I need to outline this digital divide aspect because the Southeast Asian market is highest in terms of the biggest digital divide out there. Now, there might be there's a misconception that the digital divide is only happening in like third world countries. That is not true. As I mentioned, there's a lot of rural, remote communities in Canada, in the US, in my own backyard that literally still is suffering from that digital divide. So the problem is, though, the issue is getting worse. So if you look at like South Korea or Japan, they're leading the pack, but you go down to Cambodia and they're not doing so well. Now, there's also the digital gender divide, right? And this is something that not a lot of people are aware of, but globally, there's 23% less likely, women are less likely to have internet access compared to men. Now, if you look at that map, the blue is actually, it surprised me when I saw this slide. That's Mongolia, okay? And then the rest are, so this is basically at par or better, but everywhere else in the world, as you could see, they're actually not as well connected. And then this causes other problems, and I'm sure you've seen this all over the news. Women make less money than men. The problem is if they don't have access to the same level playing field as men do, well, how are they supposed to compete? Now, when my wife was looking at the presentation when I was preparing it, and she's like, that doesn't make any sense. Women talk a lot more than men. And obviously the first thing that came to my mind is like, maybe that's the reason why the husbands are not buying them phones. So, but anyhow, it's an interesting statistic that you could imagine how things could go wrong from a foundational issue, and it's about fixing it at that layer before you're able to advance the agenda and have like true equality in the sense. So, if you look at blockchain as a whole, a lot of projects, use the buzzword blockchain, but it's almost like trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. With telecom specifically, because of the decentralized nature, whenever you transact with somebody, you pick up the phone and you call somebody, you don't know that person. You don't necessarily need to trust that person to make a transaction because you are already communicating with an outside party. And if you're able to leverage something that's already inherently built to be a zero trust system, it makes it so much more interesting and sexy to be able to deploy a network fast enough and truly validate the fact that the node that goes up, so this antenna or this user device that is replicating or emitting a wireless signal, is actually who they say they are, and validate that this is a trustworthy node without knowing anything about that node. So if you look at the traditional 3G networks and the evolution, the why now question is key. 5 years ago, this would have been impossible. Decentralized wireless wouldn't have worked very well. But with the advent of 4G, 5G, blockchain technologies that with low latency and low gas fees, you're able to deploy this network because now you don't have to worry about radio planning. In a 3G network, you used to have to do a lot of radio planning in order to avoid interference. With 4G and 5G, you're basically rolling out the network, and the devices themselves are able to mitigate any radio interference challenges that by having replicated nodes in a neighborhood, or your next door neighbor is deploying another node that might interfere. This is not like Wi-Fi. This is true cellular with voice and data capabilities. There's already more than 4,000 nodes deployed. In the US, they have something called the CBRS, which is a Citizens Broadband Radio System. So it's basically unlicensed spectrum that you can deploy anywhere in the US, and you can actually create a node to provide voice and data. There's other players that have deployed this technology out there, and they're actually functional. Unfortunately, this is a bit of an anomaly for the US because nowhere else in the world they have such unlicensed spectrum to be deployed for cellular coverage. But, and this is why it's very important to partner up with operators to be able to deploy these networks. Now, the other component that is critical, I'm not sure if you're aware, but every email that you get in your inbox is about 4 grams of carbon emissions. That's a big number just if it's like clean, valid emails, non-spam. I get about 100 spam emails every day. And you use the multiplier effect on that, how much waste is happening in the ecosystem here? And by decentralizing networks, whether it's on radio level, email level, you're able to filter out right at the edge before it infiltrates the network and clean up all that junk and basically help with the carbon emissions, which is a huge issue that, you know, with all the climate stuff that's happening out there, this is a key component. So that's one of the things. And then obviously the social empowerment of feeling good about what you're doing and giving back, saying, hey, I just bought some carbon credits, right? Like basically that's what you're doing by rolling out these networks. The other thing is centralized data centers are also a big consumption of power that if you're able to decentralize that, if you already have a home or a building that's running power, that's running internet, why not use that as mini data centers instead of deploying mega data centers? And from a disaster recovery, we had an outage last year in Canada, so one of the major telco networks. So in Canada, we have basically 3 major incumbent networks. Each one has about 30% market share. We had a major outage, and because it's a centralized network, even though they're spread all over the country, the entire country went down for 1/3 of the population. So you can imagine how detrimental that was. And if there was a decentralization aspect to it, well, guess what? You might lose 10% of the network, 5%, 20%, but you're never going to lose 100% of the network. So how it works, I've been talking a lot about the problem. How does this thing really function? So KarrierOn we're basically a software orchestration layer that allows people to order these nodes. So it's like a Shopify experience for cellular technologies. You order a node, you get it delivered. You can either get a professional installer or you can install it yourself. And for every dollar, so if you think of like a pie chart, every dollar that comes into the network, 50% goes to the gateway owner. So that's a revenue split right away. 30% would come to the KarrierOn orchestration platform for all the magic to happen, all the signaling, all the interface with all the other, you know, telcos, like the telco 2.0, let's call it, interface with the telco 3.0, and 20% goes to what we call the spectrum donor. So if you recall, I was mentioning how do we work with incumbent operators. Well, a place like downtown LA, AT&T, for example, has tons of spectrum, but it's not deployed in that underground garage, so it's wasted. Now, if there's a way for the landlord that owns that building to put an antenna himself, pay AT&T 20 cents of every dollar that it generates, well, guess what? That's 20 cents that they would have never seen on that revenue. So why not let that person deploy it and have a multiplier effect? And in return, AT&T is giving their customer satisfaction knowing that they have access to public safety and connectivity in that underground garage. So market validation. We have about 40 radios across Canada and the US right now. So they're all proofs of concepts that are actually generating traffic, real traffic on them. We've chosen to do more of the macro installs for now, just to track all the data and make sure that we're validating what we've assumed we would see. So this is like real world data now that we're collecting and seeing how users will interact. So these are all KarrierOn antennas that our installer, so we actually sent an install team to deploy in all of them. And one of the focus areas as well is indigenous communities. So in North America in general, actually this is global challenge, but in North America, the indigenous communities were given land sovereignty rights. But nobody ever talked about the air rights that they should be looking at. So there's billions of dollars flying over their airspace, but they're not able to monetize on it, let alone if they even have connectivity in the first place. So now what we're doing is we're deploying these radios, bringing them connectivity, but also allowing them to monetize on their airspace where they have the land sovereignty rights on, which is a game changer in a lot of angles and fronts. So this is some of the data from our dashboard to show you. So we've taken, what we're looking at here is the roaming attempts by operators. We just took a slice. And you could see, I mean, you could scroll down, but obviously this is a static slide. But the data we're collecting here is showing that some of these nodes in North America that we've deployed are actually being accessed by global operators. And this is just the first few of them. If you were to scroll, we were also very surprised to see that the connectivity is simply not there for a lot of the existing operators, not providing the proper customer service or customer connectivity that if I'm a subscriber of this provider, I expect service in these areas. Well, the reason why they're pinging our radios is that means they're either poor coverage or no coverage in some of these areas. So you know, one of my favorite quotes is when Mother Teresa said, you know, it might seem like what we're doing is a drop in an ocean, but at least it's a world with an ocean that won't be with one less drop if we don't try this. So we're doing our part. I'd love to, please scan, that's my LinkedIn, that's my email, and I'm open to any questions that you might have, and I'm happy to chat as well afterwards. Any questions? Yep.
Thank you very much, Samer. Very nice presentation, very nice project. Actually, I'm coming from telecom background. This is perfect, especially for the reasons you mentioned, the rural areas without coverage, and 1 billion person in the world. Just one point, we can discuss maybe later if the answer is long. The shared spectrum now, how that spectrum provider will give you the rights when it is only mandatory for him, not to give to others, actually by the law?
It's a great question. We work with operators. So the way the licensing, obviously licensing differs quite a bit from country to country. However, the overarching theme is that once the operator owns it, they can allow an installer or a value-added reseller to install it on their behalf and broadcast the signal, as long as they approve it. So it's no different than a roaming agreement. So in a mobile world, we have roaming agreements with one another, and we go through a checklist that to validate, you know, if, for example, an Etisalat customer roaming on a network in Canada, we go through a checklist, and as long as we pass all the checklists, the points, then it's fine. And we would do the same thing to validate that to that operator that we are running to their standards in their own home country. And that's a key point, because you're right, you need to provide carrier access or carrier grade quality to that operator to give them the peace of mind that they're doing something good for the consumer now.